Well, 50 minutes, actually.
Everyone, we're going to get started now. So if you're still in what is becoming a sort of long line there for food, can I ask that you take your seats, let us get started, and you can partake of the food at the end of our presentation, just so we can stay on time for everyone. Thank you.
Oh, I'm nervous. That's to mute it? Okay.
Yes, so I have a brief intro. I'm going to do the warm-up question to just introduce yourselves, and I'll go from you down, right? Then I'll show the object, and then I'll go through the 3 questions we devised, okay?
Oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry.
I was going to say, so we are introducing ourselves, right? Like backgrounds
Yes,
and everything.
I'm going to say, I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself and
Great.
backgrounds
Yeah.
for today. Okay. All right, everyone, welcome. Welcome, students. Welcome to the John Martinson Honors College Annual How We Think Forum. I am Dr. Liz Bright. I'm a clinical associate professor and associate head of academic affairs here in the John Martinson Honors College, and I'm going to serve as your moderator for the forum today. With me are 4 of my faculty colleagues in the Honors College. We have Dr. J. Peter Moore on the end there, Dr. Jason Ware, Dr. Ashima Krishna, and Dr. Marish Megalaboy. Our event today will be an interdisciplinary discussion that has become a signature format here in the John Martinson Honors College. I want to first of all acknowledge and thank our Associate Dean for Research and Creative Endeavors, Dr. Christina Bross. She is the one who first devised this model, which has become a signature for us. And I'd also like to extend a special thank you to all of the faculty and staff and students who've made our presentation today possible. The purpose of the How We Think Forum is to bring together an array of experts in different fields for conversations around a shared object of inquiry. Often this is something visual or material, but sometimes it's something conceptual or symbolic. But an idea or object around which we might have common dialogue, but also very different ways of seeing, questioning, and interpreting. One way to think about the conversation that we will have today is a bit like cubism in modern art, where we aim to explore the many different planes or viewpoints that can be had at the same time, from the same thing, and in the same space by observers of different knowledge backgrounds. It's our hope that bringing this interdisciplinary dialogue to you as students will enhance your abilities to think about your future contributions and to sharpen your lens for what you will see in the world. So for our format this afternoon, the panelists have been provided a set of prepared questions that we're going to explore together to initiate some dialogue amongst us. Following this, we're going to open up the conversation for questions from you, the audience, and you can pose questions to the panel members based on the discussion. There is a microphone here to my right, and so at the end, as we invite you to share your questions, you're welcome to step up to that microphone and line up to share them. So, with that said, I'm going to ask our faculty panelists to each introduce themselves and share a bit about their academic backgrounds to get us started. So, if you would, please share a little bit about yourself, introduce yourself, tell us your background, and also, if you would, tell us a little bit about how you came to be the scholar you are today. We'll start with Dr. Moore.
Okay, so I'm Dr. Moore, or Pete. I'm a scholar of literary studies. I focus primarily on 20th century American lit with a focus on African American literature. My degree is in literature and African American studies. I'm also a poet with a few collections that have been published, and on top of that, I'm a publisher or a printer. I work with students to restore vintage printing equipment that's now housed in the STEAM lab, the section called the Print Bay. One way I like to think about what I do here is I'm aspiring to be like a one-stop cultural shop. So there's creation, like I can guide students in creative writing and creating their own narratives, poems, plays. That we have the tools to do publication so they can publish their work. And then in some of my classes, there's the integral element of analysis and literary interpretation. So all three of those things have been important to me. I talk a little bit about how I found myself in academia in my response to your first question that's coming up. So I'll hold that for now.
Sounds good. Thanks.
Good afternoon. I'm Jason Ware, Clinical Associate Professor in the Honors College and Director of the TREX Research Generator, which is focused on working with undergrads like yourselves to partner with community and industry partners to enhance the human condition. That's what the Research Generator is all about, and that's actually what I like to do from an academic perspective, is train and develop undergraduates who do research and complete that whole scholarship cycle, meaning you present, you publish, you make your findings public, but then take it to the next level by, again, working with community and industry partners to address very real issues, both domestically and internationally. My PhD is in a field called curriculum studies, which I know you're probably very tired of hearing the word interdisciplinary already, but it is. Curriculum studies is an interdisciplinary look at sort of knowledge creation. So we're taking a look at the cultural, political, and economic dimensions that impact education and how we come to know. The work that I do, however, is in very informal learning spaces. So not focused necessarily in a classroom, but using the community as our playground. That is the informal learning space that I investigate with students and work collaboratively with folks to make better.
Good afternoon. My name is Dr. Krishna, Ashima Krishna. I am a clinical associate professor and director of the Urban Matters Lab. The lab is a research sort of incubator, if you will, where we have students all the way from first year through fourth year doing some really incredible work that is developing narratives, historical narratives related to Black heritage sites in the greater Lafayette area. So that's one of the projects that we are undertaking right now. If there are any of you interested, come see me after, and I'm happy to give you more information. My training has led me to this point through three very distinct fields which are interconnected but sort of contribute to that whole sense of interdisciplinarity as well. My undergraduate degree is in architecture, so I am trained as an architect. My master's work was in historic preservation planning, and my doctoral work was in city and regional planning. And so you kind of see right there that there are three fields, but they are overlapping and connected somewhat. And that's what's brought me here. The research that I do here, the courses that I teach in the Honors College, all engage with those three areas of specialty that I bring to my expertise. And hopefully all of you see that in my classrooms as well.
Hello, my name is Dr. Murish Makalafwe, and I'm an 18th century historian of what we call the Atlantic world, so the interconnections between lots of different points along the Atlantic Ocean. I write and I study the phenomenon of exile, so the forced migration of people, typically by empires. That's typically what I would write about. I teach classes on migration, diaspora, exile and banishment, and I also bring students on study abroad. So I'll be bringing students to Ireland with me in March, unfortunately during St. Patrick's Day, to study the question, what does it mean to be Irish? And that's one of the critical kind of questions that I ask in a lot of my research, a lot of my teaching, questions around identity, how that is formed, what factors produce it.
All right. Thank you all very much. So our object of inquiry for today's discussion is this. Okay. This is a mural in downtown Lafayette, which has come to be known as the George Floyd mural. It can be found at the intersection of 6th and Ferry Streets, and it first appeared in June 2020 by the artist Art If You Wanna. That was following George Floyd's murder by Minneapolis police the month prior. Mr. Floyd's death, as many of you may be aware, spurred numerous protests around the country. So I want to open up now the panel questions, and I'll allow the panelists to jump in how they'd like. Our first question is your first thoughts. What were your first thoughts when you saw the image or when you encountered this object? What did you immediately notice? What questions or ideas came to mind initially for you? And then secondarily, how did your background or expertise as a scholar lead you to see it in that way?
I'll go ahead.
Go.
So I wanted to make a point from the outset that what I noticed first is something that kind of predates my introduction to the academy. So long before I was pursuing a PhD, I grew up in working class communities in the American South, which for me meant that I grew up in and around predominantly black communities. And looking at this image got me thinking about what were those reasons that triggered me to, or inspired me to go and pursue advanced studies in literature. And one of the things I come to is growing up in these surroundings, I felt really lucky to be part of a community in which people took advantage of language. I was always impressed by how the people that were around me, how they could like pack a phrase with power, subtlety, humor. And so my early life was really rich in comedians, storytellers, graffiti writers, lyricists, prayerful worshipers, speaking in sanctified tongues, all of it. Language was this very vital, intense property that was communally shared. And when I look at this, I'm reminded of one of those kind of key functions of language and how it functioned in my early life, and that was to mourn. I often encountered public mourning rituals in my community, some that would look much like this. And sometimes they would take the form of airbrushed T-shirts or street corner memorials or silent observances, unending eulogies that would find a way to weave themselves into our everyday conversations. And so this kind of threw me back to an era before I ever thought I would graduate high school or ever even go to college. And so there was a kind of, bittersweetness about the image for me. But now, having become a trained literary scholar, I now kind of approach it with a kind of categorical perspective, thinking about, well, I'm not only interested in what is being said with this image, but how it's communicating to me. What are the ways in which it's doing that? And one of the things that I study is essentially how language works, how it's able to have its impact on us structurally. And genre becomes a really useful key in that, or a useful tool. And so now when I look at it, I think of it in terms of the elegy or the elegiac. I think we have a definition that I want to. So you may not know this, but an elegy, according to the Princeton Handbook of Poetics, is a lyric poem, usually formal in tone and diction, suggested either by the death of an actual person or by the poet's contemplation of the tragic aspects of life. In either case, the emotion, originally expressed as a lament, finds consolation, and that's a critical point, that the poem is a way of reaching and achieving wholeness and consolation in the contemplation of some permanent principle. Well, so first important to know is that elegy, while it pertains to literature, has escaped literature, and it functions as an adjective now. We call things elegiac. There's a kind of sensibility of mourning and loss. You can see elegy in any field of cultural production, film, any visual art, any mode. And I think the mural is interesting to me, and this is my final point, because I think within my discipline, it helps me think about an essential split that happened maybe at the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century, that black writers had a hand in kind of bringing about. And that was this split between a kind of classical notion of the elegy, which you see defined here, and this kind of postmodern anti-elegy. I think this mural, maybe if we go back to it,
Yeah.
Is doing both of these things. So in tone and diction here, it's not like a poem, but its tone and diction are replaced by color and posture. The blue kind of sets out this mournful tone, while the posture of the subject makes Floyd appear as at once human, vulnerable, and noble, and almost stoic. The classic elegy culminates with the dispersion of mourning. The realization of an eternal virtue consoles the mourner. And so if you've lost someone, you find some way to console yourself by thinking about some immortal principle that beauty is everlasting or all life is fleeting. And that sums up the effort to get consolation. And so the scrawling script on the right, Black Lives Matter, speaks to this drive for some consolation. But then, and then this is where I kind of do the kind of literary critic close analysis thing of like really getting deep on punctuation. If I had to point to the one thing that drives me to back to this piece and kind of obsesses over it is the redundancy of period dot at Black Lives Matter, period dot. That you have these two things that are essentially doing the same thing. And what I'm trying to work through when I think about it is how that second period is almost, and the way I'm interpreting it, is almost saying something like, yes, wouldn't it be nice if that consolation was available? That Black Lives Matter, period, an emphasis. Yes, that should be an immortal truth. But then this recognition that that is a struggle to find that unity around that belief. And so the kind of second period there to kind of drive the emphatic point home even further to say that this is an ongoing question. And because there's a second period, it makes me think, well, maybe there's going to be at some point a third period that follows it. And if we have that third period, well, then we're looking at a different grammatical element altogether, which is the ellipsis. You know, and the ellipsis, the three dots, is essentially when a word is missing. So anytime you see that like three dots, right, in some kind of written prose, it means words have fallen out, or we can kind of understand it without the word. And that's really powerful for me here because it makes me feel like there's an absence that's ongoing. So rather than kind of lunging towards some easy consolation, the poem, the piece is kind of staging both the drive for consolation and the awareness that any sense of wholeness is ongoing and always incomplete. And so, yeah. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Morton. Can I then open it up to others who have very different takes, perspectives, or what did you see? What came to mind?
So when I looked at this piece, there were sort of two different ways in which I saw it, and it's in the place that it is in. One was through the lens of what Dr. Moore also briefly mentioned, which was memorialization, right? This mural clearly is in intent to remember, right? And that's what we have, that's the basic, essential sort of need for, that fulfills the need for memorialization. And so, so there is that lens, and then the other lens is the place where this is located. And so if we, want to look at the sort of street view. So if you take a look at the mural in its larger context, it is located in a historic building, a historic building, and that's the sort of context in which you see the mural. When you look at it now in this context, it's very clear. A couple of things are clear, really. The first one was that the artist used this very clear and visible and easily accessible, relatively blank space that was available to them. The arch of that filled-in window provided really sort of a picture frame for them, if you will, which also then sort of leads me to think about what was there before the mural, right? So clearly, if you look at the facade of the building at this time, that window has been filled in at some point in history. And so, then, it makes me think about what was there before? What was the reason for filling that window in? How is it that we came to the point where there was this blank facade for the artist to use for that memorialization piece? Thinking about it a little bit more, Liz, if you want to go further, one slide. I'm going to turn this into a little bit of a nerdy lecture for you. If you look at the bottom right corner, at the intersection of Ferry and 6th Street, this is a Sanborn map from 1885. So you see the building did not exist at that time. You see two sort of pink rectangular blocks that says DWG. I don't know if the large screen is very clear, but if you can kind of follow along at the intersection of Ferry and 6th on the, this would be the left-hand side of your screen. Oh, perfect. So it says DWG, which is dwelling. So that building did not exist at that time. If you want to go one slide over. Excuse me, I'm battling a cold.
Can we go to the next?
How do we go back to unzooming it?
There, is that?
Oh, there. So is that the next slide? Yeah. So now you see that that one has, those two small dwellings have disappeared. And now we see really the existence of the building as we see it today. If you want to zoom in a little bit, Liz, if it's possible.
If they can.
Okay, perfect. So now we get to see really the building here, and this is, I believe, from 1888 or 89, if I'm not mistaken. So clearly that shows that this building is over 100 years old, right? And we see, there are different uses that this building has gone through. We see that at that point, this was the Lafayette confectioners. There's some mangled text in there, but that's the text that you have on top. And if we move to the next screen, a couple of years later,
Thank you.
thank you. Now this has moved to right to the top of your screen. A couple of years later, it had been turned into offices. And then the front portion of that space had been turned into a dance hall. And that dance hall is what it exists as today. So that entire building is now the Lafayette Ballet Company. And they own and operate their ballet classes and ballet facility within that large building block. And so that's sort of framing the context for that mural a little bit, if you will. And then, Liz, if you want to go back to that street view.
This one?
No, the street view.
All the way. Yeah.
Perfect, thank you. So that sort of gives us a little bit of a framing, right? And then when you see the building itself, it is historic brick. So it's brick that's over 100 years old, which then brings to mind in the creation of an artwork like this, what's the material that's used for the artwork itself? What's the material or the treatment of the brick before the artwork was made? Because both of those are going to react with each other. And now I'm putting my sort of architect and historic preservationist cap on to think about how are those paint materials and other kinds of materials going to interact with each other, right? What's going to be the longevity of those materials over a period of time? Will that mural fade over time? What was the kind of treatment that was given to it? How easy would it be to, maintain it? preserve it for a longer period of time, take it off if that's the need in a particular moment in time. So all of those questions sort of come to mind, and particularly in the context of the historic brick that mural is created on. So I'm going to stop for now, and then we can
Excellent,
transition to
thank you.
something else.
Okay, so I want to open it up for others to contribute.
Could you keep this up?
Keep this one up?
Yeah, I mean,
Sure.
it's your slide, but I want to use it.
I love to share it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So when I first saw the mural, the George Floyd mural, I'll just say very quickly that I park right in front of it very often because just to the south end of that same block, there is a McCord's candy store, and it's been there all of my life. I grew up here in this community. So I go to McCord's because in my foyer there is a crystal dish that was my mother's before she passed away, and I fill it with a certain candy that my kids like that I get from McCord's. And so it's easier to park right here. So I park in front of that George Floyd mural often, and then one day it was there, because obviously it wasn't. And so the questions that came to my mind were, what's the story behind this mural? How did it come to be? Like, who's the artist? Was this commissioned? And because of the work that I do, I've mentioned that the city is sort of like the playground, and I partner with the city and our local historic preservation commissions, and so I know that there's usually a particular purpose for the murals that we have throughout town, and so those were the questions that came to my mind, like, how did this come to be? Was it commissioned? Who were the decision makers, and like what kinds of responses, community responses and reactions did it inspire? Because my sense was that this wasn't the same type of mural that you might find throughout the rest of our community. There's a citywide public art trail, and in this public art trail, there are like over 120 different works of art. So statues, murals, just different types of art. And it felt different than what you might typically find on that art trail. And so I wanted to know, okay, is this piece of art something that just sort of popped up and it was sort of unsolicited? And if so, how is the media going to respond to this? And then how are people going to respond to the story version of what might be real or not that the media sort of told? And across the street, so the only buildings that you can see, so I guess to your left, it's no longer that, but the lower brick building used to be, until relatively recently, our local newspaper, the Lafayette Journal and Courier. And now it's been converted into dwelling spaces, like condos. And so in my head, those are the questions I was asking. Who did this? Was it commissioned? How are people responding? How's the media gonna pick up on this? Like, if the Journal and Courier were still right there, I could see that they would just be on this, and I'd be very interested in knowing how they story this and what's gonna unfold after that. Because from a community perspective, I'm just very curious about how people would respond, and from all kinds of different local residents. Because when I see this image, and this is maybe getting a little too personal, but I'm just responding to the question, what were some of my first thoughts? And that is, it's not a caricature, because I think it actually does a decent job, but of course my brain immediately picked up on maybe different elements of George Floyd's image that might be a bit exaggerated. Like, I was trying to figure out if you could please go back to the original one, like if that's a heart, if that is a heart there that's supposed to symbolize his chest, or if it's indeed supposed to just be his chest. Because if it's supposed to just be his chest, it's obviously oversized. And so then my brain is thinking about how Black men are often, you can see this sort of, there's this emphasis on size that goes back to, you've got to be strong and big because you're slaves, and that's what your body was equipped to do. And so these are the questions. So I was asking, like, is that supposed to be a heart, like a big heart? Because that's a totally different thing than if it's supposed to be his chest, which is clearly not his chest. It's like way too big to be his chest. So then I'm thinking about this from a caricature perspective and how other people like me in the community would respond and see this image, and what types of responses would they have, and would they, like me, maybe even be ashamed of their responses? Like, why am I thinking these things? Why am I having this type of a reaction? So I was looking at this very much from a community response perspective. How is a community going to respond to this? Like, and is this piece of art actually going to be here, like, the next time I come down here to pick up candy? Because in my head, I was thinking that maybe it would just be removed if it wasn't commissioned, because while it says Black Lives Matter and no justice, no peace, not everybody in our community has that same sentiment. And so those are the types of questions I was asking myself.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that.
Could we go back to the first image, please?
The one of George. Oh, yeah, it's already up.
It's up.
Sorry,
It's up. Yeah, go ahead.
So I got interested in history because I love stories, and I love stories about normal people. Normal people like yourselves. Every one of you has a story. You are living your lives, you're making decisions, you're making choices. As a historian, we do two different things. We ask questions and we think about context. So let's ask a few questions first of all. The first question that I thought about when I saw this mural was, who is this man? And the second question that I asked, of course I knew it was George Floyd, the second question I asked and continue to ask is, what did this man do to deserve to be knelt on for 9 minutes and eventually murdered? And the answer to that question is very little. I then think about who made this mural. Who are they? Do they live in the community? Do they still live in the community? Are they still here? Who are the people who have annotated this mural? They've made conscious decisions. They've included no justice, no peace. They've included Black Lives Matter, all of these different choices that are being made. I then think about who vandalized this mural multiple times and why that continues to happen. And that leads into away from questions and into context. And as a historian, we learn about the long processes of history and the continuities of history and how history rarely repeats itself, which is the old adage. Instead, history often rhymes. And when I look at this mural, I think about the rhythm of American history and the continuities when it comes to the Black experience in the United States, from the Revolutionary War, through the Civil War, through the Jim Crow South, through segregation, through the Civil Rights Movement, all the way up to 2024 now today. What is changing and what is staying the same? I think about where it's happening, the context, and us living in Lafayette, Lafayette being one of many towns in Indiana. 44 towns in Indiana at one point were sundown towns where it was unsafe for Black Americans to be after it got dark at night. And I think about what it means to be a citizen in this country and all of the rights that are enshrined onto people and at the same time invalidated consecutively. So I think about a lot of things when I look at this mural, but that's as a historian, that's what I'm trying to think and see.
Thank you. Yeah, and thank you all for those wonderful thoughts that you've shared. We're quickly moving ahead in time, so I'm going to try to move us to interdisciplinary question on the interdisciplinary nature of the conversations that we can have, and then leave time for questions from the audience. I'll just point out a couple of sort of themes or things that I've been hearing amongst you. And I'm serving as moderator, but as an archaeologist, of course, I tune into things that are about artifacts that come to the fore, context, and the meaning and importance of context and historical context across what you're discussing, as well as emphases on language, and pattern and speech, history often rhymes, and the connections between that and our concepts and seizing on the power of language. Also questions of belonging, which I think underlie a lot of the questions and perspectives that you've brought to the table. So I want to move us to a question about your insights and perspectives from your own disciplinary and other aspects of your backgrounds, and how those perspectives might be valuable in broader kind of interdisciplinary understandings of it. In other words, how does this perspective sort of move into broader dialogues with others who maybe differ from you in how they view it?
Okay. Could you repeat your question again, please?
Sure. What insights from your perspective or your disciplinary research on the object might be really valuable or might open up interdisciplinary understandings of it?
Yeah. So I think one of the things that I had been sort of thinking about with respect to this particular artifact was why this particular space, right? And so that's where you sort of begin to then think about some of the things that my fellow panelists have talked about. So for example, when Dr. Ware was talking about the community's response to this particular mural, the location of a particular artifact or a particular mural or a particular sort of memorial is incredibly important, because the access of a community to that particular memorial, how frequently they're able to see it, how frequently or how easily are they able to interact with it, is going to have a deep impact on the process of that memorialization, right? And so, again, that sort of connects to what Dr. Baer was talking about in terms of how does the community look at this? And that's directly related to where this is located. It's also got to do with some of the questions that Dr. Magalubhoy has asked in terms of, some of the historical sort of events, some of the historical precedents that have led us to this time and place in 2024, and how that impacts specific moments in time in very different ways. And so this particular mural, in terms of memory and what the intention of the artist would have been with the location of that mural, would be something that I would be very interested to explore. And it's very interesting to also see how some of those threads begin to come out as we are thinking about sort of the time and the place of this particular mural. It also, I think, lends itself in very interesting ways to the ways in which we can think about keeping that memory for a long time. So when we're thinking of keeping that memory for a long time and preserving this memorial, for example, it brings back to some of the things I mentioned earlier about how certain treatments would come into play, material treatments that is, to try and preserve or save this memorial in the space that it is located in. And so those are some of my initial thoughts when I think about how this connects to what the other panelists are talking about. And I'll let others talk as well.
Well, I just want to say something really quickly. I heard two terms that I think my field provides some vantage on. The first is intention. And so, for a very long time, texts were interpreted as codes to try and figure out what the writer or what the artist was trying to do and trying to achieve, and that was the supreme goal. And then philosophers, theorists come along and say, well, what the artist thought or what the author thought might be secondary to reception, or might be secondary to all the mini receptions that happen, that there's no single reception, that there's no single meaning that takes place in the act of interpretation, and that rather trying to game out what it is the artist thought, you're trying to figure out what the artwork is thinking, not what the artist thought. And there's a long history of essays putting pressure on that kind of conventional notion of intention. And so I would say that that would be one thing. And the other is context. I think one way of thinking about literary form or any kind of aesthetic form is thinking about how it reflects its context. I think it's very important that we note that this is a piece that was not, hammered in marble, that it's not a piece that has a kind of formal register to it. It's very informal, and how that kind of relates to the context in which we find ourselves. It has an air of resourcefulness to it, that it's using everyday materials to do something. And I think in looking at the formal elements, you're starting to see, well, why would he or she or the artist, why would they draw upon these elements to make this work? How are these choices indicative of our moment and our context now? How does globalization, how does the internet, how do all of these things impact what we see in front of us, even at the formal level? Okay.
From a contextual perspective, I'm thinking, of course, from a community well-being viewpoint. And so what I said earlier about the candy and going to the candy store wasn't just to be silly or goofy, but it was just to sort of emphasize a pattern in my life as one, an N of one within this very large community, who, people have their own traditions and their own ways of moving about and living. And I want to sort of come back to that, not the candy, but the fact that, this is a community of people who are moving in and out all of the time in terms of not the community, but moving about within. And so I guess from my perspective as a community well-being researcher, I'm thinking about, from a community well-being, we're concerned with, do people feel safe where they live? Do they take pride in their community? Are they willing to come together? Are they desiring to come together with other people to make the community the best that it can be from their perspective? And this kind of a memorial of what happened to this man serves within the community, the Greater Lafayette community, to, in some ways, just enhance more distance. So for example, when I say historically, like within the last 15 years, there's been a significant demographic shift. And since that time, there's been this, what's called the Great Chicago Migration Myth among local residents, that we've had lots of people of color move to the area from Chicago, and with them has come increased crime, and it's degrading the community. And right around the time when George Floyd was murdered, there was also this sort of, I don't like to use the word resurgence because it's not like it was ever dead, but this kind of more in-your-face recruitment of the Ku Klux Klan, and obviously white supremacist thought and action was being mobilized, and people began to become, I will say people of color became more fearful of maybe more white people. White people were saying the black people in the community are tearing our community down. So then when it comes to thinking about, do people feel safe within the community, this is a reminder that maybe, no, some people don't feel safe on either side, if you want to call it a side. People are fearful of each other. Are people willing to come together to make the community the best that it can be from their perspective? Some people are, but some people aren't. It depends on who you are. And then are you willing, do you take pride in your community? So these are the big questions, but from like a sociological perspective, how you were raised, where you came, how your thought processes in terms of your worldviews influenced by your culture, it's brought into it's brought into this picture here from a contextual perspective, and feeling safe. not saying that law enforcement is a field that we want to bring in, but our local law enforcement has said that crime is actually it's decreasing, but the media is telling our city that it's not. And so we have people who are fearful of each other, who are not necessarily excited about coming together to address real issues to enhance community well-being. And so that's just, I guess, some additional perspective or insights that we've talked to, when I say we in my research group, we've talked to local residents. And so it's not as if I'm just using an anecdote like people think or say. No, the residents are telling us that this is an unsafe place and that we have to fear for our lives because we have these gangbangers here and the police aren't doing what they need to do. And then on the other spectrum, we talk to people who are like, I don't trust other people necessarily, and I don't want to get to know them because I don't feel safe. So this mural just generates a whole bunch of emotion. Yeah.
I'm going to hold us there so that we have a little time for questions, and maybe Dr. McGullibwe, if you want to jump in and share a little bit as the questions come up. But I want to invite students at this time, if you have a question for the panel that you would like to pose, please come up to the microphone and share. I also invite you as well to share what you see as well. Can expand our dialogue today. So, brave souls, you are more than welcome to come up and have at it. I'll keep that going.
I have a question about this mural. You keep talking about community and how you look at it from a point of view of how the community reacts to it. My question is, with people constantly having murals for Black Lives Matter and then other people just living their lives, does this constant reminder of the differences in color somehow worsen the situation? Or do you think that bringing it to people's attention constantly all the time somehow helps bring this matter into their minds? And if it somehow helps the situation die down, or if it just increases the struggle, which just makes it last longer?
I would say that images like this, and obviously people are free to disagree, I would say that images like this don't increase or decrease a problem. It's not the image itself. I mean, I don't need to be reminded on a daily basis who I am. I'm constantly reminded. I have a lived experience every day that tells me that I'm different, because people do remind you about that. So it's not the image itself, it's more of the politics that are wrapped around it, right? Like the politics, not Black Lives Matter, the image, or George Floyd, the image, but the politics and then the identity politics and the ways that that works to separate and to generate, but not the image or being, I don't need an image to remind me that there's a difference between black and white or whatever you are, like whatever makes you different. I don't need an image for that. I don't think that image or seeing Black Lives Matter signs causes harm. It's the politics that are connected to it.
So would you say that even though they don't cause harm, they still help in some way?
I think they generate conversations like this, which I think are very helpful.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Dr. Ware, you mentioned briefly that perhaps an image like this can increase an awareness of division. Would you have a suggestion for how a certain mural could still bring up important topics, but bring about a more peaceful air, or if it's even helpful to bring about a peaceful air in this topic?
Sure. So let me clarify. I would, because there's another question that we didn't get to, and that is like, if we were going to do research into about an object, like from our disciplinary perspectives, what would we do? And so I would say that just the conversation itself is just the beginning. And so I would want to actually hear from people what their responses are, because I don't know. I know what my responses were, right? But I would want to hear from the community, like how are they responding? Because it may not at all be negative, right? And so I would say that what I would want to do is just to engage in a full-on research project where I'm interviewing people at various, like people from the community at different levels, to hear how people are actually responding. And so I don't think the image itself is right. Like, I don't know. I don't know if I really answered your question, Grant.
That's all right. Thank you.
Thank
You're
you.
Okay, so when I saw this image, because George Floyd's story just blew up suddenly in the media, which I think is a good thing in a certain sense, I saw this mural as sort of not a replication exactly, because this artist obviously did their own rendition, but almost as a copy of a lot of different murals and a lot of different art pieces that were suddenly showing up everywhere. And in this sense, it shows that George Floyd has become, to some people, not necessarily a person, but a symbol of a movement, just as Martin Luther King did. And I'm wondering, what is your view on this? Do you think it's a good thing, a bad thing, a neutral thing? And how do you think this impacts other people's thinking of people who do see him as a symbol versus people who might still just see him as a person? And just general thoughts, I guess.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's a great question. I'm trying to think through in real time a response. What I was most compelled by with your analysis is your awareness that it's sitting within a chain of other images. And so as much as it's being inspired by an act, it's also being inspired by the artistic representation of an act. And then you start to feel this kind of removal. And then you have to start asking questions about, well, what's the political valence or function of this art form? And in one way, you know, one thing that art can do, forms of cultural expression within a kind of political sphere, is it can set up small, contingent spaces of exception that don't operate within the larger logic of the nation state. So there are forms of community, there are forms of mutual care that can take place in the act of creating art that are actually what the art is trying to achieve, if you see what I'm saying. It's not that it's trying to do something, it's like in the act of making the thing, you are living out the creed that you're trying to, the message that you're trying to impart. Now, I don't know anything about the construction of this mural, but my hope would be that the idea of turning a person into a symbol would have, I mean, which obviously, as you know, has all kinds of problematic implications. The kind of exploitation of an individual, the general history of treating black bodies as empathetic and symbols for suffering to kind of justify one act or another is, like I said, exploitative. But within this context, you have to ask the question, well, what might it look like within a case-by-case scenario? Because I could imagine art movements emerging like the memorial that exists in Minneapolis, where it is a community-founded, articulated, community-curated site that is not just about memorializing, it's about creating, like what I said, one of those states of exception. And when you go to those places, the thing that's really interesting is the exceptionalism of this one individual starts to fade. And you start to recognize not only is this a pattern and a history, but that it's not about one person. It's about a structural situation and one response to it. So that's kind of the first level of my thinking through. But I think it's an excellent question that I'm going to keep pondering. Thank you.
So, and I'm so sorry, but we are at time, and so we're supposed to end at 1:20, I believe, as how we advertised it. Yes. So I want to say thank you to our panelists who joined us today, and thank you to all of the students who are here today. If there are additional questions, please feel free to come up and talk with us. I think we can linger in the room for a while. Those of you who did not have a chance to get some food at the back, please help yourselves, grab some lunch. Anyone who is able to stay and linger, faculty and staff from the Honors College are here in the room. We welcome opportunities to network and chat with you for as long as we're able. One final piece, For those of you who are engaging the Suitable app, I have up here a QR code where you can log in for that. So please don't hesitate to come up and take advantage of that, and come also just speak to us, engage, and thank you all so much for your time today. Thank you.